Good evening, and welcome to the first night of Nigel's Nightmares. I'm Nigel Bach, and tonight I'll be reading you a short story I wrote called The Small Woods. Shall we begin? This is the untold story of the Smallwood family that lived in the town of Smithville, New Jersey in the early 1900s. Jacob and Sarah Smallwood married in 1907 and exactly 9 months later had their first child, Mary. They were a handsome couple and their love for each other was genuine and deep. After all, in a small town like Smithville, everyone knew everyone, and Jacob and Sarah knew each other practically since birth. Jacob's family owned a farm where they raised pigs, cows, and chickens. His family was small compared to other families of the day. One brother and two sisters. His brother died before he turned 9 years old from the measles. Both his sisters had an interest in theater and moved to New York as soon as they were old enough, with one of them, Eve, finding moderate fame. Jacob and his father managed the farm, and when his father passed April 4th, 1903, Jacob became the owner of the farm. He was well liked in the community for providing the best meats, eggs, and milk in the region. He also employed a dozen men, and he paid well. When he and Sarah married, it was a community affair that everyone in the town attended. Sarah Baker was the only girl in a family of 9 children. Her parents led a more modest life on the outskirts of town. In a house too small for their family, several of the boys used to sleep in a shed in the backyard. Her father was a blacksmith that died at 39 from an injury at work that left him with gangrene in his leg that spread quickly through his body. Despite several amputations, it couldn't be stopped. Sarah's mother was a seamstress and managed to provide for the family until her passing 9 years later. Sarah's brothers all went off to fight the war. At first, letters would arrive from all of them, except for William. He had dyslexia, although back then there wasn't a name for it, so he never wrote. One by one, the letters stopped, and soon after, notification arrived from the War Department that they had perished serving their country. In modern times, that would be a sad tale, but in those days it was closer to the norm. Very few people survive past 40, be it death from disease, or in this case, the reality of war. Jacob and Sarah's focus was not on the past. It was on running the farm and raising a family. Jacob's mother, Elizabeth, lived with them until her passing the day before Sarah's second child was born, a daughter they named after his mother. Over the next few years, they had 5 more children. In addition to Mary and Elizabeth, they had Annie, Sally, Doris, Silas, and after a 5-year break, James. In 1924, Mary, the oldest, was 16, and James, the youngest, was 5. The Smallwoods were lucky. Everyone was healthy. For years, the story of the Leeds Devil circulated, a beast with bat wings, a goat's head, horns, small arms and claws, and hooves for feet. It was also said to have a forked tail. The Smallwoods were a religious family, and although they never mocked anyone that spoke of the beast, when alone they shared their amusement in what they were sure was folklore. In the gatherings that occurred each Sunday after church services, more and more people spoke about sighting the beast, now called the Jersey Devil. One Sunday, John Winter had attracted a crowd of men, telling them how several of his sheep had gone missing, and after midnight a few days earlier, he shot at something over 7 feet tall next to the barn, savagely attacking my goat Molly. When he shot at it, it flew away with all but Molly's head in its mouth. John attributed his detailed description to the fact it was a full moon on a clear night. John was attempting to enlist the help of the other men to hunt and kill the beast. Many eagerly agreed. Jacob had no interest, as he believed the loss of livestock John was experiencing had more to do with his alcoholism and leaving the gates to his property open, and less, much less, to do with a creature he didn't believe existed. 22 men went out on that first hunt. Fathers and sons wandered the woods looking for a trace of the beast. Over a few weeks, the number of hunters dwindled down to 5 or 6. One Sunday morning, John Winter, his son Nathan, Hiram Steele, and his sons Gustav and Aaron were not present, and they had not been seen for days, claiming they would not return until they killed the creature. Their spouses were inconsolable, worried about their disappearance. Pastor Miller made an appeal to all healthy men in the community over the age of 12 to join in the search for the missing men. Jacob felt pressured to join the search, but Sarah pleaded with him not to. "We have 7 children of our own that need your protection," she told him. "Thank the Lord Silas is only 11, or they would want him out there also." That night after dinner, Jacob called Sarah into the living room while the girls cleaned up from dinner and Silas was upstairs reading to James. "Could there be something out there killing livestock and now possibly men?" Jacob asked his wife while lighting his pipe. "Jacob, we have more cows, chickens, and pigs than any 3 families combined in this area, and nothing has happened to any of our animals," she said. She then looked at Duke, their large mongrel dog, lying peacefully in front of the fireplace. "You know he barks whenever an owl hoots, and he hasn't made any noise." Jacob nodded. He just wanted his wife's reassurance. Chances are John Winter and the others were far out in the pines, embarrassed to come home empty-handed with just tick bites to show for their effort. Jacob then laughed. A goat's head and wings. While they were concerned about the uncertainty of what was happening, they went to bed that brisk November night, sure the men would return the next day or so, and that a coyote or fox was responsible for the attacks on livestock. 3 a.m. the next morning, Jacob bolted upright in his bed when he heard Duke wildly barking downstairs. Sarah awoke a moment later to see Jacob grabbing his shotgun and running out of the room in his nightclothes. "Jacob, don't go out there!" She threw off the covers, the night air enveloping her, and she grabbed her robe. Downstairs, Jacob found the front door open, and he heard Duke's barks slowly fading in the distance. He stumbled in the darkness to find and light the kerosene lantern. Thankfully, Sarah always kept the matches and the lantern in the exact same spot, so once he had his bearings, he was able to find it and get it lit. He was startled when he heard young James's voice calling for the dog. He was on the front porch, alone. "James, what are you doing out here by yourself?" Jacob asked his youngest son as he pushed open the screen door, stepped outside, and hung the lantern from a hook. James was barefoot and unafraid. He pointed off in the direction of Duke's barking and stated with childlike innocence, "Duke's chasing the monster." "Monster?" Mary said, drawing screeches from her sisters, all of whom had gathered at the door. Sarah appeared with a second lantern and moved in front of her children. Silas pushed past them to join his father. "Silas, come back in here," Sarah commanded without result. "Jacob, what's going on?" Duke got the scent of something. "Probably a coyote," Jacob said, dropping the last syllable in coyote. "Duke, you get back here," he yelled. The dog's bark suddenly became a snarl, like he had encountered something. "Father," Silas said. "Call your dog, son," Jacob commanded. "Daddy, what monster?" Annie asked. Like her siblings, she was genuinely terrified. This kind of thing didn't happen in these parts. Silas called for Duke, and Jacob pushed James back in the house into Sarah's grasp. A moment later, Duke let out a blood-curdling yelp. The girls screamed and hugged each other and young James. The yelping continued but grew louder, a sign the dog was making its way back to the house. Silas stepped off the front porch, worried about his dog. Duke appeared out of the darkness, running right past Silas and crashing into the screen door. Mary swung it open and he ran deep inside the house. Duke was terrified, and they all knew, up until this moment, nothing scared that dog. There was movement in the pines headed towards them from the same direction the dog just came. "Jacob, Silas, get in here," Sarah pleaded. Jacob raised his gun. "Silas, get inside," he ordered his son, while keeping his eyes peeled in the direction of whatever was moving through the woods towards them. Silas got behind his father, but did not go inside. A snorting sound, like a bull makes, was heard. Jacob raised the rifle and took aim. Then he lowered the rifle and looked in disbelief. What appeared to be glowing red eyes were visible, bobbing up and down as if attached to something galloping towards them. "Silas, inside now!" Jacob yelled in a tone he was not known for. Sarah opened the door and pulled Silas inside by the collar of his nightshirt. She pulled all the children back and grabbed the inner door, ready to slam it shut. "Jacob, get in here," Sarah pleaded. Just then, the charging beast broke through the woods and into the open. In the darkness of a new moon, Jacob could only see the glowing eyes and the large, dark mass of its body. He took aim between the eyes and squeezed the trigger. At the same moment, the creature leapt into the air, the sound of its leather wings flapping. He missed his target. The flash from the shotgun blast briefly illuminated the beast. It was massive and horrifying. It had to be 3 feet taller than Jacob, as large as their largest cow, and trailing behind it was a smell worse than decaying meat. It screeched as it raised into the night sky. The sound faded, then grew louder. It was circling and heading back. Jacob grabbed the lantern and backed into the house, shutting the door. It was so rare that they locked the door that he had trouble sliding the bolt. He turned to Sarah. "Take them into the basement," he ordered. Sarah was moving as quickly as she could towards the basement. It was difficult with all the children gripping her so tight. "Now, Sarah," Jacob yelled to her. "I'm moving as fast as I can," she yelled back. She opened the door and pushed all the children into the basement. She handed Mary the lantern to lead the way carefully down the steps. Jacob went into the kitchen. The back door was open. This time of year that was unusual, but the wind could have blown it open, or worse, something could be in the house with them. He raised his gun and walked slowly towards it. The lantern flickered, casting large shadows on the wall. The hair rose on the back of his neck. He closed the door and bolted it. In the distance he could hear the screech of the creature growing louder. From under the kitchen table he heard a noise. It was faint, but something was there. One of the kitchen chairs slid away from the table a few inches as whatever it was moved. Jacob slowly picked up the lantern with his left hand and bounced the shotgun under his right arm, ready to fire. When he lowered the lantern beneath the edge of the table, he saw Duke underneath, trembling. "Come on, boy," Jacob said, and the dog lunged forward tightly, circling Jacob's legs. Jacob headed to the top of the basement stairs and paused as Duke ran down the steps. Jacob then stepped onto the landing and pulled the door shut. There was no way to lock the door from this side. He headed down the steps. In the corner, Sarah and the children were all huddled together. He did a quick head count before the sound of the beast squealing was heard. drawing a gasp from Sarah and frightened sobs from the children. "Jacob, what is it?" Sarah asked, suspecting he wouldn't know. "I don't know," he said, his voice cracking. Jacob, a tall man, muscled from a life of honest hard work, always made his family feel safe. He was trying his best not to show the fear he felt. The sound of the flapping wings ended with a thud as the creature landed outside. Loud thumps were audible when its hooves struck the ground and it walked about. Jacob held a single finger up to his lips to silence the children. "Turn out the light," he whispered to Sarah. There was only one window in the basement, and it was small, too small for a creature that size to come through. Jacob dimmed his light as much as possible and moved towards the window. The sound of their frightened livestock breaking out of the barn and into the corral could be heard. They were running for their lives. They were animals and had no way of knowing they were safer in the barn than out in the open. The Smallwoods could hear the beast as it snorted, sniffing the air, trying to locate them. Jacob hoped it would take a pig or a chicken and leave, but it seemed more interested in them. The heavy stone walls of the basement were mostly below ground, but rose 2 feet above ground level at the top, serving as the foundation that the house rested on. Where the house and stone foundation met, dust and dirt blew into the basement as the beast sniffed there. It knew where they were. Jacob put his lantern on the floor near the wall. As the thuds of the beast's footsteps walking outside were heard, Jacob followed along, keeping his shotgun pointed in the direction he believed the beast to be standing. As the footsteps moved towards the window, Jacob raised his weapon. Sarah pulled the children tight. Silas stepped behind his mother and inadvertently brushed against the washboard hanging on the wall. It crashed to the ground with a loud bang, causing his siblings to scream and Sarah to attempt to silence them. Jacob spun around to face his family, shushing them. Annie pointed towards the window and screamed. She was the first to notice the glowing red eyes peering inward. The creature screeched, its hot breath steaming up the window. The window shattered as its claw burst through, and it nearly grabbed Jacob. The beast then shoved its head through the small window. Only its goat-like snout was visible. It snapped its jaws. Large, pointed yellow teeth were visible. It screeched, and the entire Smallwood family, including Jacob, screamed. Jacob fell backwards onto the dusty floor, barely out of the beast's reach. He raised the shotgun and fired. The sound the creature made was different than what they had been hearing. It was pain. The painful screeching continued and grew quieter as the creature withdrew. Its heavy footsteps grew lighter as it moved away. Jacob grabbed the lantern and ran to the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. "Jacob, don't go out there!" Sarah screamed to no avail. Silas followed his father. "Silas, no!" his mother screamed, but he disappeared into the darkness. Jacob unbolted, then threw open the front door and burst onto the front porch. If whatever this thing was hurt, he planned on finishing it off. Silas appeared a moment later with a BB gun that had only been used to shoot tin cans off the barnyard fence. It was the only weapon he had. Jacob turned the lantern up to its full brightness. It did more harm than good, blinding him in the surrounding darkness. He squinted, attempting to see ahead of him. He looked down, saw hoof marks in the dirt, and what appeared to be blood. In the distance, straight ahead, he heard labored breathing. The creature must be there. Slowly he advanced, unaware Silas was behind him. The labored breathing grew louder as he approached the barn. Jacob turned the corner and raised the lantern. his shotgun pointed forward, ready to fire. What he discovered, however, was Nellie, one of their cows, lying on her side. She was mortally wounded, her belly ripped open and innards spilled out. Her nostrils blew out a mist of blood as she took her final breath, and her eyes turned dull. It was suddenly silent. Jacob stared at the carnage in front of him and held up the lantern to get a better view. Nellie was a huge milk cow weighing over 1,500 pounds, but the creature had shredded her with apparent ease. Oddly, for a moment, Jacob had forgot about the creature and was thinking about what the cost would be to replace a cow like this. He was thrust back into reality when he heard movement behind him, and he spun around, shotgun raised, pointed right at the head of Silas. "Silas!" Jacob yelled, a combination of anger and fear at having nearly shot his son. He pulled him close and kissed him on the top of his head. The air stood still, and Jacob could hear his own heart beating. "I could have killed you, son," he said. They stood together for a moment before the silence was shattered by the screams of his family. Jacob lunged forward, nearly falling and dropping the lantern, before regaining his footing and sprinting for the house. As he rounded the corner, he saw the creature at the basement window, holding James in his short clawed arms. It had returned and grabbed the child, but it was a tug-of-war with Mary, who held on to James's ankles. She was halfway through the basement window, secured in place by Sarah and Elizabeth, who held on to her legs from inside. Jacob screamed out, "Hey!" as he ran towards the beast. It turned its head and screeched, not releasing James. Only one eye glowed now, the other blasted away by Jacob's shotgun earlier. "Let him go!" Jacob screamed, running and holding the gun up. He had to get close before firing, or the shotgun blast would hit James. Jacob feared the creature would rip James limb from limb before he could free him. The creature then squealed in pain and released James. Sarah and Elizabeth fell backwards, still holding onto Mary's legs, pulling her and James into the basement. The creature turned from Jacob and swung its tail, encircling a pitchfork sticking out of its side and pulling it out. It then spread its wings and leapt into the air, squealing as it flew upward and back towards the pines. The darkness was suddenly illuminated by multiple guns firing in its direction. Jacob slid to a stop and shielded Silas. As the beast's screeches faded into the darkness and the smoke cleared, Jacob raised the lantern. The light illuminated the faces of John and Nathan Winter, Hiram Steele, and his two sons, Gustav and Aaron. All but John held their guns ready to fire again if the beast returned. It was John who stabbed the beast with the pitchfork. He picked up the bent pitchfork. "Sorry, I think you're going to need a new one," he said, handing it to Jacob. When the dust had settled, the children, except for Mary and Silas, all laid on the living room floor under blankets sleeping. Miraculously, James was fine except for a few scratches, and was asleep in Jacob's arms as Sarah served steak and eggs to the men sitting around the large kitchen table. The men that had saved their family. They devoured it in a manner expected for men that had not eaten in days. Sarah took James from Jacob and rocked him as she held him close. She almost lost her baby, and her whole family for that matter. "John, I'm sorry," Jacob said. "For what?" John asked, mumbling with a mouthful of food. "For not joining in the hunt. I thought you were, crazy," Jacob admitted. "I know you did," John said. "You thought I was a drunk, imagining things. But now you know otherwise. We'll get whatever that is one of these nights." "I'll help," Jacob said. "Me too," Silas offered. "No, you won't, Silas," Sarah said firmly. "We will let you know if we need you," John said, placing a hand on Silas's head and rustling his hair. "And Jacob, it's best you stay here for now. If it's all right with you, after we let our families know we're safe, we're going to camp out here a few nights because chances are it'll be back." "Of course," Jacob said. He noticed John's plate was near empty. "Here, let me get you more." No, I'm good. "Nathan and I need to get home to let Betsy know we're still alive." John looked around. "Where's Nathan?" They all looked around. Nathan and Mary had slipped unnoticed out onto the front porch. They sat on the swing, watching the sun rise. "You're brave," Mary said to Nathan. He was dirty and he smelled like a teenage boy missing for days in the woods. Nathan was a quiet young man, handsome when he wasn't covered in filth. He always liked her, but she had never paid him any mind. Until now. He placed his dirty hand on top of hers before the front door swung open and Jacob, Sarah, John, Hiram, and his sons stepped out. Nathan quickly pulled his hand away. "There you are," John said, seeing his son. "Let's get home." "John, wait a second," Jacob said, going back into the house and re-emerging with a bottle of the finest whiskey. "Here, take this," he said, holding the bottle out to John. John smiled. "You keep it," he said. In the years that followed, Mary Smallwood and Nathan Winter married. John Winter never drank again, and the beast never returned to the Smallwood farm. Sightings of the Jersey Devil still regularly occur in the Pine Barrens of southern New Jersey to this day. And that is the untold story of the Smallwood family. I'm Nigel Bach. Try to get some sleep. Good night.